Mock used to recite the whole law from memory for the enlightening of the assembly, and in Ireland there was, as is known, a special class of men reputed for their knowledge of the old traditions, and therefore enjoying a great authority as judges. Ancient Laws of Ireland Introduction, Ignace, Étude de droit international, tome 1er, 1896, pages 86 sequence. Among the Osset, the arbiters from three oldest villages enjoy a special reputation. M. Kovalevsky's Modern Custom and Old Law, Moscow, 1886, second, 217, Russian. Again, when we are told by the Russian annals that some stems of northwest Russia, moved by the growing disorder which resulted from clans rising against clans, appealed to Norman Varangier to be their judges and commanders of the royal school, and when we see the Neas or dukes elected for the next 200 years always from the same Norman family, we cannot but recognize that the Slavonians trusted to the Normans for a better knowledge of the law, which will be equally recognized as good by different Slavonian kings. In this case, the possession of runes used for the transmission of old customs was a decided advantage in favor of the Normans, but in other cases there are often indications that the eldest branch of the stem, the supposed mother branch, was appealed to supply the judges, and its decisions were relied upon as just. It is permissible to think that this conception (related to the conception of tanistry) played an important part in the life of the period, but research has not yet been directed that way. While at a later epoch we see a distinct tendency towards taking the sentence finders from the Christian clergy, which at that time kept still to the fundamental, now forgotten principle of Christianity, that retaliation is no act of justice. At that time the Christian clergy opened the churches as places of asylum for those who fled from blood revenge, and they willingly acted as arbiters in criminal cases, always opposing the old tribal principle of life for life and wound for wound. In short, the deeper we penetrate into the history of early institutions, the less we find grounds for the military theory of origin of authority. Even that power which later on became such a source of oppression seems, on the contrary, to have found its origin in the peaceful inclinations of the masses. In all these cases the thread, which often amounted to half the compensation, went to the folkmote, and from times immemorial it used to be applied to folks of common utility and defence. It has still the same destination (the erection of towers) among the Kabyles and certain Mongolian stems, and we have direct evidence that even several centuries later the judicial fines in Pskov and several French and German cities continued to be used for the repair of the city walls. It was distinctly stated in the charter of St. Quentin of the year 1002 that the ransom for houses which had to be demolished for crimes went for the city walls. The same destination was given to the Ungel in German cities. At Pskov the cathedral was the bank for the fines, and from this fund money was taken for the wills. It was thus quite natural that the fines should be handed over to the sentence finder, who was bound in return both to maintain the schooling of armed men to whom the defence of the territory was trusted, and to execute the sentences. This became a universal custom in the 8th and 9th centuries, even when the sentence finder was an elected bishop. The germ of a combination of what we should now call the judicial power and the executive thus made its appearance. But to these two functions the attribution of the duke or king was strictly limited. He was no ruler of the people, the supreme power still belonging to the folkmote, not even a commander of a popular militia. When the folk took to arms, it marched under a separate also elected commander, who was not a subordinate but an equal to the king. Somme, Franzische Richtung Gerichtsverfassung, page 23, also needs Gestes des deutschen Volks. First, 78. The king was a lord on his personal domain only. In fact, in barbarian language, the word konung, koning, or sinning, synonymous with the Latin rex, had no other meaning than that of a temporary leader or chieftain of a band of men. The commander of a flotilla of boats, or even of a single pirate boat, was also a konung. Until the present day, the commander of fishing in Norway is named not Kong, the king of the nets. See the excellent remarks on this subject in Augustin Thierry's Lettres sur l'Histoire de France, 7th letter. The barbarian translations of parts of the Bible are extremely instructive on this point. The veneration attached later on to the personality of a king did not yet exist, and while treason to the king was punished by death, the slaying of a king could be recouped by the payment of compensation. A king simply was valued so much more than a free man. 36 times more than a noble, according to the Anglo-Saxon law. In the Code of Rotary, the slaying of a king is however punished by death, but (apart from Roman influence), this new disposition was introduced (in 646 26 in the Lombardian law, as remarked by Leo and Botta, took over the king from blood revenge, the king being at that time the executioner of his own sentences (as the tribe formerly was of its own sentences). He had to be protected by a special disposition, the more so as several Lombardian kings before Rotary had been slain in succession. Leo and Botta, first chapter, first 69-90. And when King Nu or Canute had killed one man of his own scholar, the saga represents him convoking his comrades to a thing where he stood on his knees imploring pardon. He was pardoned, but not till he had agreed to pay 9 times the regular composition, of which 1/3 went to himself for the loss of one of his men, 1/3 to the relatives of the slain man, and 1/3 the thread to the scholar. Kaufmann Dutch Geskicht BD first die Germanen de Uzet, page 133. In reality, a complete change had to be accomplished in the current conceptions, under the double influence of the Church and the students of Roman law, before an idea of sanctity began to be attached to the personality of the king. However, it lies beyond the scope of these essays to follow the gradual development of authority out of the elements just indicated. Historians such as Mr. and Mrs. Green for this country, Augustin Thierry, Michelet and Lucier for France, Kaufmann, Janssen, W. Arnold and even Nitz for Germany, Leo and Botta for Italy, Bielaev, Kostomarov and their followers for Russia, and many others have fully told that tale. They have shown how populations, once free and simply agreeing to feed a certain portion of their military defenders, gradually became the serfs of these protectors, how commendation to the church or to a lord became a hard necessity for the freemen, how each lord's and bishop's castle became a robber's nest, how feudalism was imposed in a word, and how the Crusades, by freeing the serf who wore the cross, gave the first impulse to popular emancipation. All this need not be retold in this place, our chief aim being to follow the constructive genius of the masses in the mutual aid institutions. At a time when the last vestiges of barbarian freedom seemed to disappear and Europe, fallen under the dominion of thousands of petty rulers, was marching towards the constitution of such theocracies and despotic states as had followed the barbarian stage during the previous start of civilization, or of barbarian monarchies such as we see now in Africa, life in Europe took another direction. It went on lines similar to those it had once taken in the cities of antique Greece, with a unanimity which seems almost incomprehensible, and for a long time was not understood by historians. The urban agglomerations down to the smallest burgs began to shake off the yoke of their worldly and clerical lords. The fortified village rose against the Lord's castle, defied it first, attacked it next, and finally destroyed it. The movement spread from spot to spot, involving every town on the surface of Europe, and in less than 100 years 3 cities had been called into existence on the coast of the Mediterranean, the North Sea, the Baltic, the Atlantic Ocean, down to the fjords of Scandinavia, at the feet of the Apennines, the Alps, the Black Forest, the Grampians and the Carpathians, in the plains of Russia, Hungary, France and Spain. Everywhere the same revolt took place, with the same features passing through the same phases, leading to the same results. Wherever men had found or expected to find some protection behind their town walls, they instituted their conjurations, their fraternities, their friendships, united in one common idea, and boldly marching towards a new life of mutual support and liberty. And they succeeded so well that in 300 or 400 years they had changed the very face of Europe. They had covered the country with beautiful sumptuous buildings, expressing the genius of free unions of free men, unrivaled since for their beauty and expressiveness, and they bequeathed to the following generations all the arts, all the industries, of which our present civilization, with all its achievements and promises for the future, is only a further development. And when we now look to the forces which have produced these grand results, we find them not in the genius of individual heroes, not in the mighty organization of huge states or the political capacities of their rulers, but in the very same current of mutual aid and support which we saw at work in the village community, and which was vivified and reinforced in the Middle Ages by a new form of unions, inspired by the very same spirit, but shaped on a new model, the guilds. It is well known by this time that feudalism did not imply a dissolution of the village community, although the lord had succeeded in imposing servile labor upon the peasants, and had appropriated for himself such rights as were formerly vested in the village community alone (taxes, mortmain, duties on inheritances and mortgages). The peasants had nevertheless maintained the two fundamental rights of their communities, the common possession of the land and self-jurisdiction. In olden times, when a king sent his vogt to a village, the peasants received him with flowers in one hand and arms in the other, and asked him which law he intended to apply, the one he found in the village or the one he brought